waiting for it to start. And we're live. Hello, and welcome to Fermenting Opinions. I'm your host, David Popoiden. My co-host, James McVeigh, is not here with us tonight, but this is our Fermenting Opinions Hangout that we do weekly. If anyone is turning in for the first time, we are also a podcast that you can find us on iTunes under Fermenting Opinions. Tonight, we have with us a new guest, Eric, and a returning friend of the Ferment, Siobhan. Hi, guys.
What's up?
Hey. And tonight we're talking about, and I've got some technical stuff that I got to do here in a second, but tonight we're talking about the Supreme Court case of the Masterpiece Cakeshop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. And this is a case from all the way back in 2012. It's moved up the appeals chain. It is now, they did oral arguments for that yesterday at the Supreme Court. And we're going to get into that in just a minute. You guys say hi, talk for a second, because I want to get this video up and around a little bit. So I will be right back.
So what should we talk about?
Well,
I am at a loss.
how do you know David?
We met a couple of weeks ago, I think, through this Facebook page called the Apologetic Academy. And we just kind of have been discussing different topics back and forth since then, and yeah. So
did you grow up in a church?
Thankfully not. I mean, my parents are like Catholic-ish. They're like, I mean, to be blunt, they're not exactly. I mean, they're the believe just because you should believe type. I mean, the most academic Christians in the world. So I mean, yeah, but I just.
What are they, Jesuits?
What's that?
What are they, Jesuits?
But most of my life, I never believed anyway. So you know, that was irrelevant to me.
What changed your mind?
And years of searching, I guess. There's a lot of personal stuff to it, and then there's a lot of, you know, studying different aspects of the faith, and you know, the historical part and, you know, philosophical stuff. And I guess it was kind of like a culmination of things at 3-4 years, and yeah, it's a long story, but that's the gist of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I bumped into Eric basically because I kind of threw down the gauntlet on this one, because I remember you when we were talking on the Hangout last week. You were saying, yeah, you're kind of ready to talk about this, you know, because you had some frustrations to vent or something, and you wanted to have a nice little debate. But you know, like I was telling Eric before this, we don't really do, you know, try to, you know, drop bombs on anyone debate style or getting involved in ambush tactics or anything else like that. We just want to have a conversation. But I did throw down the gauntlet on this issue because I, having since joined this Apologetics Academy group, you know, I'd been in there for maybe a couple of months, and just lots of rigorous debaters, and so it was kind of nice. I figured I would get some interest on this one because politics does intersect with religion. And part of the reason I joined this group is because we have our own Facebook discussion group. And for me, I'm not trying to be like, I do involve myself in Facebook debates and stuff like that, but like, I'm not trying to do it there because I'm not trying to vitiate the conversation and cause hard feelings amongst people, because that tends to happen when you get into charged topics. And the environment in this other group, it seems a little bit more controlled, so I'm not really worried about anyone going off the rails too much. So, but it gives me, it helps me stay sharp, basically. But I decided to try this out, and Eric was so gracious to take up the call, so to speak, on this issue. But the court case, like I said, Masterpiece Cakeshop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission. Like I said, it was a case from 2012. What happened to this guy? He runs a bakery, which includes making wedding cakes. Fellow's name, if I can remember, is Jack Phillips is the Cakeshop owner. And in 2012, a couple, Charlie Craig and David Mullins, came in, asked him, say, hey, we want you to make us a cake. And he's like, well, what kind of cake? He's like, well, we want a wedding cake. And he says, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'd be happy to do something else for you, but I'm not going to do a wedding cake because it's a same-sex wedding, and I don't support that because of my religion. And so they left in a huff, essentially, and that ended up it pretty quickly in a lawsuit, which Phillips lost, and he's appealed up the chain, essentially, saying that his religious freedom is being violated, essentially, because he's being compelled, essentially, to act in a way that's contrary to his faith, I guess. Whereas in Colorado, even in 2012, even before the Oberfeld decision. Oh, hey, Haley.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for joining us. Haley, meet Eric.
Hello.
Cool. Anyway, so what was I saying? So back on the books, even at this time, the Colorado Civil Rights Commission had, I guess, as part of their what they do is that there's a law on the books in the state of Colorado, which is the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, with regards to businesses of public accommodation, and that says that you can't discriminate as a business of public accommodation on the basis of race, religion, sexual orientation. I don't know if gender identity was included at that time, but basically saying that you can't do what he did was the law on the books in the state at the time. And so now we're here, 2017, almost fixing to be 2018, and we're having oral arguments because he's appealed this all the way up to this point. So Eric, I know you're probably going to be singular in your opposition to probably what the rest of us are thinking, because, well, no, I won't speak for Haley. I'll let Haley offer her own position, because I think she takes a little bit of a different direction than maybe Siobhan and I do. But Eric, what is your take on this?
To brief my position, I mean, I'm an anarchist, so I don't think government should be involved, period, with anything. So, I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty clear, when it's outlined in the First Amendment that, Congress shall make no law prohibiting or protecting religious freedoms. I mean, for me, that just spells it out. Government shouldn't be involved either way. So I think this whole thing is, ridiculous, honestly.
Okay. Does anyone want to jump in on that, or?
I will say, first off, the Constitution only prohibits Congress, like the federal Congress, from doing what it did. And to some extent, it does prevent state governments from violating certain amendments. But there's a difference here between discrimination and allowing businesses to discriminate based on religious beliefs or otherwise, and saying that this is a law that has religious repercussions, because this is a law of what's called general applicability. So for instance, everybody has to pay taxes, with the very small exception of sole proprietorships owned by the Amish, basically. And that's because it's a law of general applicability, and regardless of the fact that you don't believe in paying taxes because your religion dictates that your society is going to have to take care of everybody. Hey, Eric, you want to? Is that you or is that Haley?
I think it was Haley, because
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, you weren't opening a door or something, were you?
Yeah, I was closing my. Sorry about that.
Haley, it's your fault. You've ruined it.
Anyway, okay.
No, it's fine. Go ahead, Shimon.
So number one, like the First Amendment does not protect you against what are called laws of general applicability. So that means that they're applied across the board, and they are not meant to specifically infringe on religious freedom. So for instance, like I said, everybody gets to pay income tax and FICA, right? Except for sole proprietorships owned by the Amish, because they do not believe in taking any kind of social benefits like Medicare and Medicaid, Social Security. So, you know, it's the very rare exception. So even if you're Amish and you have any employees whatsoever, you still have to pay income tax. That's the same kind of situation here. This isn't a religious law. It doesn't have to do specifically with religion, and it does not, you know, the intent behind it isn't to target religion. Therefore, you don't really get a religious exemption. And secondly, I mean, we do have, you know, equal protection, the Civil Rights Act, and things like that. Because I think it's worth noting that historically, religion has been used to justify discrimination, regardless of whether we're talking about race or gender or sexual orientation. Religion has been used to, you know, justify people's basically discriminating against people. I mean, they didn't serve Black people in restaurants based on religious beliefs. And that's a Supreme Court case. And the Supreme Court said, we're not buying it. So that's, you know, kind of the same thing here is like if you're, you know, open for business, generally speaking, but you say, I'm not going to sell you a cake because it's for, you know, a gay wedding ceremony, like that's the same kind of thing. Also, I think it's worth noting that this is an agency proceeding where the Colorado Civil Rights Commission brought this case, not the couple that was discriminated against.
Huh, that's interesting. I didn't know
minor
that.
technicality.
Yeah, the
Should I respond or?
yeah, if you want to, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So I guess I kind of want to get to the crux of this. Why shouldn't a business owner be able to decide who they do and don't serve?
They can, as long as they don't violate the law. Like, you know, if I'm a restaurant and I say, I'll serve anybody except for Black people, that's a problem, right? And it has to do with, you know, if you read those cases and you look at the precedent, what it really boils down to is that, you know, rights are great, but unless you have a mechanism for enforcing them, they really are kind of meaningless. So, you know, for instance, if you're Black and you're traveling in the South in the 60s, you know, and hotels won't rent a room to you and restaurants won't serve you, then, you know, your ability to travel and, you know, enjoy the rights that you would in your home state are very much truncated. I mean, the reality is that, you know, without kind of like a way to ensure that you're treated fairly where the rubber meets the road, rights don't mean shit.
It's a difference in categories of people versus individual persons. You as a business owner can say, I don't want to do business with that guy because he never pays me on time. He's a really high maintenance person. But you've done business with him in the past. But there's a specific reason for maybe that one particular individual where you decide, I'm not going to do business with that person. But then to say that I'm not going to do business with an entire category of people, that's just two different things, and it doesn't really hold water to say, why can't someone choose? Of course you can choose as a business person, but you can't choose to eliminate people without giving them, you know, the same respect that you give every other American citizen who's willing to do business with you.
Yeah. I mean, eliminating people categorically based on the color of their skin, their religion, their ethnicity, their religious beliefs, their sexual orientation, those are where we draw the line.
Yeah, and bear in mind, just briefly, that this is a law specific to Colorado. That it is. I think there's an argument to be made that protection of sexual orientation should be and really is protected on the federal level, but that's not really on the books everywhere. So we're talking about the applicability of a state law to this case. So you would go to a place like, I live in Tennessee, like Tennessee or Alabama or Louisiana. You're probably not going to, I'm almost certain that those states don't really have laws specifically protecting that demographic. So this is, with regards to sexual orientation, it's an anti-discrimination law for Colorado. So
right, exactly.
Take that for what it will.
Yeah, I mean, it's a Colorado law that prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation, and they prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation, which, you know, at least not currently is on the books on the federal level. But yeah.
Okay. So just to make sure that I understand where you're coming from, is your argument that can choose who they do and don't serve, but they're pretty much not free from the consequences that would follow? Is that it?
Well, I mean, it's the context. It's in the context of pretext. Why are you choosing not to do business with that person? Is it because they're black, or is it because, you know, you don't, there's a history there, they don't, you know, for whatever reason, you don't want to do business with them? And is it based on an actual assessment of who they are as a person, or is it based on your predetermined prejudgments about that person before even getting into business?
So if I was a business owner and I didn't want to serve black people, for instance, from your perspective, what would be wrong with that?
Well, it's discriminated against black people for no reason.
Other than the basis that they're black.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Which is prohibited.
I mean,
by
they're
the
people, you know. I mean, if you're a business, I don't, for economically, I don't really see why you would want to eliminate an entire category of people just based off of something that they can't control and has nothing to do with their ability to be a good customer or business person with you.
But more importantly than that, it violates the Fifth Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the Civil Rights Act.
Yeah, all that too. Just that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. Are we asking the moral question, or are we asking the legal question? Like, why can't you discriminate? Siobhan just laid it out pretty flatly there. That, you know, really the big one is the, you know, Civil Rights Act 1964 with regards to you know, race or national origin. But yeah, and what we're referencing to here, in something that's been brought up, you know, as a similar fact pattern, is this Shawana was talking about before. There was this case, Newman versus Piggy Park barbecue chain in 1968. This guy, Maurice Bessinger, believed that based on his interpretation of the Bible, that races should not like commingle or something like that, and he did not want black customers in his store because to him that was commingling, and the, you know, the races belong within their own borders, and that's by the way per Acts 17:26, and I won't read the verse unless anyone really wants me to, but I did write it down. But the Supreme Court basically said, no, you can't do that. This is not it. They regard it was like a unanimous decision by the Supreme Court that it was really fatuous to claim a religious exemption to the Civil Rights Act. You just couldn't do it in this case. But anyway, so
and I think
legal,
it's also. Sorry, continue, David. Go ahead and finish.
No, I didn't really have anything else to say. I wanted to kick it back to Eric, give him a little bit more chance to talk here.
Yeah, I mean, just before we kick it back to Eric, I want to make the distinction that this is not requiring this guy to preside over, you know, gay marriage. There's nothing about this case that says, for instance, that churches have to allow gay marriage. Like, that's not what's happening here. This is a guy who makes cakes for the general public, and he is refusing to make a cake for a couple because they are gay. That's it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, I just don't want this to be turned into something that it is not, because that's not where this is going.
Gotcha. All right, Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question would be, I mean, do people have a right to my services if I'm a business owner?
You do not have a right to discriminate against people based on their race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender, religion, things like that. So,
I mean,
people have a right to your service, like, no, but you don't have the right to discriminate against them based on those certain, sort of immutable characteristics.
Well, so say I do. I mean, on one breath we're saying I do have the right to do so, but on the other, not so much, because put out of business, because government gets involved and tells me that I can't do that. So do I really have that right?
I think the point is that you have the right to decide if you want to go into business. But once you decide to go into become a business of public accommodations, you don't have the right to decide not to serve people based on belonging to a certain demographic, essentially.
I mean, one phrase that comes to mind is the customer is always right. If you're a business person, you're really, and you want to run a good business, like, I don't really see why you should try to, like, categorically exclude people from paying you money for whatever good or service you are providing. And I mean, change gay to white supremacist. It's the same thing. Like, they can't, just because someone's a white supremacist, they can't say, I'm not going to make your cake. It's just, what someone does in their personal time doesn't define the status of the relationship of business owner and customer.
Like, if your cake says kill the Jews, then they have a right to not make that cake. But that case law is predicated on the offensiveness of the message. So, like, for instance, if this couple were to say, like, I really like it in the ass, that wouldn't be okay. Like,
but
I really helped some people in this apologetics group. I posted this video to watch this and just see the eyebrows go up.
I mean, the thing is, putting kill all the Jews or I really like it in the ass, we're talking about the cake design. We're not talking about them not getting the cake. They're still getting the cake.
Yeah,
just maybe not one that says that.
The cases that say, you can deny customers based on the message that they want you to say on the cake are predicated on the offensiveness of the message. So, like, kill all the Jews, right? Things like that would be offensive. Therefore, you're not required to do that. But to say that you can't, that you can deny customer service based on their sexual orientation is a violation of the law, and that's different.
And in this case, I think we probably need to back up. Something that's important to point out is with this particular cake baker and this particular couple, there wasn't any design decided on. The gay couple went into the cake store and was like, we want a cake. And he's like, I'm not going to make a cake for you. It wasn't like, we want a cake and it says, something bad, like, I love homo, I don't know, whatever. It was just, I'm not going to bake a cake for you. It wasn't, I'm not going to put this kind of message on a cake. It never even got to that point.
Exactly.
Eric, what are your thoughts, sir?
I mean, I like what you were saying about, them having the right to not, that they don't want to serve, but I guess I'm still trying to figure out how I would still have that right if I don't really, because, again, I mean, you do have government coming in and pretty much threatening to shut down the business because I didn't want to do business with somebody regardless of the reason.
So, for instance, if I'm hiring people for my law firm and I say, you're an asshole and you're also not qualified, it doesn't matter if you meet any of these other criteria. I don't have to hire you, but I can't discriminate against people solely on the basis of race, national origin, sexual orientation, things like that. Like, if I say,
yeah.
Right. So if I look at you and I'm like, well, you're black, therefore I'm not going to hire you, that's a problem. Or if I'm like, oh, you're a woman, I'm not going to hire you, that's a problem. If I say, you don't do good work, you steal money, things like that. Like there have to be reasons specific to that person.
It comes down to an issue of a balance of liberties. If you as a business owner, you have the liberty to choose, but you can't do it indiscriminately.
Discriminately.
That's what I mean. It's you as a business owner have the right to dictate how your business is done, but also people who exist in this country and are Americans have a right to not be discriminated against based off of color of their skin, their religion, their sexual orientation, programs they participate in. It's a balance of liberties. So I get what you're saying, like, do I have a choice of a business owner or don't I? You absolutely do have a choice, but also we have to protect other people's liberties to not be discriminated against and to be treated as fairly as possible.
So the bounds of your rights are where your rights start to tread on other people's. Like if I have the right to have, like 15 like howling coyotes in my backyard, fine. But when it comes to the point where like it's disturbing my neighbors or like, they're digging under the fence and eating my neighbors, rabbits or whatever and like keeping them up at night or biting their kids, like that's a problem. My rights have started to infringe on my neighbors.
Well,
but
and it's
therefore my rights are confined to my backyard.
Well, it's the more so like I have the right to bake and design cakes for the general public, and I have the right to run the business the way I see fit. But people who are coming in to buy my services also have the right to not be discriminated against based solely on being gay or black or something. And it's a balance of those rights. And my right to run my business doesn't go above someone else's rights to just be treated like every other human being.
I don't know necessarily if I would consider being able to buy a cake a right though. I think that's where we differentiate.
This case is
I would consider it more of a luxury than a right.
Okay, so this case is a problem because the cake thing seems really frivolous. It's a cake, right? But think about it because like this doesn't just apply to people who make cakes. This applies to pharmacists who fill your prescriptions. This applies to restaurants. This applies
grocery stores.
Yep, applies to lawyers, applies to schools, applies across the board. So when you say it's a privilege to buy a cake, this is going to be a law that applies across the board to all different kinds of businesses. And if you say, restaurants or hotels or grocery stores or schools or like businesses who hire and discriminate based on all of this stuff, then you're essentially saying that there are areas in this country where that kind of discrimination will be very, prevalent, and the people who fall into those minority categories will essentially be completely ostracized.
Okay,
because
so
hold on, Eric's trying to say something.
Sorry, I'm just saying, like, before you say, "Oh, that never happened,"
trying to say something.
It actually has in the South. I lived there. I would know.
Sure. Yeah. So you were drawing an example there of this, and we pretty much have to allow it across the board. I don't know. With the whole pharmacist example thing, I mean, that's sort of all. If a pharmacist denies, giving someone their medication, I mean, that's sort of life or death, or it could be. I feel like that's much different than denying, baking somebody a cake. So.
Well, I think the real
law applies to both.
It's if you're selling a good or service, you can't not sell to someone based off of some category they fall in that they can't control. And whenever I say that they can't control, if they fall into a category of they don't pay their bills, that's different than being black or gay.
Well, or a woman or a Muslim
yes,
or
yes.
whatever. Yeah.
With this particular cake thing, I'm surprised no one has. So we're talking about liberties and First Amendment rights. At that base level, if you're providing a good or service, you got to treat everyone equally, and not discriminate. With respect to this particular cake, though, he's arguing the issue is whether or not he had a First Amendment right to not make this cake, and it all hinges for us to even get into this. Does he have a right to do this based off of some kind of religious liberty argument, civil liberty argument? The cake has to first be something that's considered protected speech, and meaning art. And I'm just surprised that we haven't really gotten into that yet.
It also is not falling into the First Amendment realm of religious freedom because this is not a law that,
right. I
applies
mean, it depends on whether or not it depends on whether or not if you think states' rights trump the Constitution. That's a factor as well.
I don't.
I mean, yeah, sure. We can say the supremacy clause, applies, where the states' rights couldn't trump the Constitution, but that's in a case where a state law would be in conflict with what the U.S. Constitution says. Is that essentially your argument that the anti-discrimination law in Colorado is in conflict with the U.S. Constitution?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
That essentially, the way you brought up the point made me think that it was your argument, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that the idea that these anti-discrimination law of Colorado is, based on this case, is putting that state law in conflict with the U.S. Constitution.
In a way, yeah.
No, I don't really think it is. So, like, the federal Constitution is supposed to be the bare minimum.
What?
States are allowed to add to that.
I think it's kind of an interesting point, though.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's a subtopic we could probably discuss later or something.
Well, I guess, Eric, and I'm sorry if you're just, I mean, I don't know if you don't want to talk that much, but I guess I want to know what your position is on this case and why.
Like I mentioned earlier, I'm an anarchist, so I don't think government should be involved with this, period. I think it should be left to the market, and let the market decide whether or not his business fails or succeeds based on, like, if he doesn't want to serve, well, it's not that he doesn't want to serve homosexuals, he doesn't want to bake cakes for homosexual weddings. And I mean, if that, if that affects his business to the point where, like, nobody, does business with him anymore, and, the consequence of that will be, he'll be forced to shut down that way. And that's what I think it should be left up to.
Well, if you just said that, you just corrected yourself in saying it's not that he doesn't want to serve homosexuals, it's that he doesn't want to bake a cake for a homosexual wedding. He's a wedding cake baker. So what he serves is what he does is bakes wedding cakes for people. That's the service.
He does other things as part of his business, I think. And that's
sure, but
the way he's trying to sort of mitigate the issue.
Well, I mean, I'm a lawyer. I do not just trials. I do other things. I mean, if you're a cake baker and you don't want to serve and you don't want to bake these people a cake, that is not serving homosexuals, just in my opinion. Is there a counter?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I think it should just be left up to the market. If he wants to, if that decision that he made costs him his business, then so be it. If not, also so be it.
Right. I think one of the reasons, though, that we have anti-discrimination laws is that, a lot of the times the market doesn't take care of that. If we're interested in seeing, justice done via the markets, we wouldn't need to make laws if that was what was happening. Like I live I live in the South, man. I live in Tennessee. Like, I don't doubt for a second it would take a heartbeat if these laws were repealed that we would see rampant discrimination because, well, I know a lot of these people down here and I know what they think. So,
and the truth is that for the whole
yeah, I just wanted to clarify.
You have to
Go
have
ahead, go ahead.
I just wanted to clarify real quick.
Go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
I just wanted to clarify. I mean, if the roles were reversed here, and like it was a gay baker who didn't want to do a cake for a Christian wedding, I mean, I would be arguing the same. So I just want to clarify that.
Okay.
And the thing is, I get it. I get the free market sense of things, but also I kind of equate that, with a, the free market is a forest, but you do need someone who's tending to the forest and everything to make sure that certain trees don't grow too tall to allow other trees to grow. Like there has to be something that tends to the needs that enable the forest to actually truly blossom and everything. And I think
Haley,
that
are you referring to the invisible hand of government?
I was talking about a fucking forest keeper, but
I
don't even know what the term is. I know there's a word for this. It's like tender to the, I don't know. But if you're managing a system, an ecosystem, an economic system, you have to understand that, sometimes trees need to be trimmed so that a lot of other trees can grow, because then there's just two really big trees and all the other trees die, and it's not a good forest. It's not a dynamic, diversified, well-run system. So I get where you're saying we need to let the market decide, but I do also think that the market, if we truly left it without the forest tender, whatever that word is, there's a word that I can't think of.
The invisible hand of government.
That's not it, Siobhan. It's really not it.
I mean,
I'm
I think
talking
that's pretty much
about
it.
a freaking person who works with plants, a horticulturalist. There's a term.
Forest?
Anyway, if you just allow all the plants in your garden to do whatever they are going to do, then a couple of plants will do great. A lot of your plants will die. You need to things need tending to.
Right. I mean.
And no, it's not the invisible hand of the government.
Haley.
I'm not familiar with that term in any case.
Are you kidding me? Holy fuck.
Eric's trying to say something. Eric is trying to say something.
God. Fucking cretins.
So what you're saying is if we don't have certain checks and balances in place within a free market, certain businesses will grow too big and will end up dominating the whole thing, and smaller businesses will pretty much be put out of business essentially.
I mean, we saw that, at the turn of the 20th century with things like, the Pullman family with the Pullman trolley cars, the Vanderbilts, that newspaper last name family. If you don't have someone who checks certain things, yeah.
Well, I was gonna argue that seems to be how it is right now, and we kind of do have certain checks and balances in place.
Yeah,
but this is.
I didn't hear that.
Anti-discrimination laws. It equals out the bargaining power. If you have an inequality in bargaining power, the free market doesn't decide anything. You see where I'm going with this? You have to have equal bargaining power for the whole market theory to work.
I don't think that necessarily applies in the discrimination context, but that's just me personally.
I mean, the anti-discrimination laws kind of equal out the bargaining power because, let's be real here. We live in Texas, and we all know how that would turn out if we repealed anti-discrimination laws. Because the truth of the matter is that minorities do not have the same bargaining power.
I consider the anti-discrimination laws just keeping, the garden tender in check and knowing that they can't, just not do something they still have to be a garden tender. They can't ignore certain factions of that ecosystem just because they don't like it for whatever reason. But if you're talking about equal bargaining power, I think that's a different place than in this kind of customer business services thing in connection with discrimination.
I think for me, if I guess just jump in here real quick, that it's even more maybe pie in the sky for me that, that we have these laws because like what do we want to be as a society? Like what do we, what kind of place do we want, America to be for its citizens to live in? I would like to be in a place where people are not discriminated, on the basis of some, non-fungible, category that they fall into, that I don't want to see people being mistreated, because they're old or because they're Jewish or because they're gay or whatever. Like, that's not what I want to, that's not what I want to, sort of stand up and be proud of. Right.
Yeah. And, oh, sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, and then just thinking about that, it's, if you're just providing like a gooder service to the general public, good for you, but provide it to the general public. But if we're going to start talking about religious opinions and everything, I understand if a church doesn't want to marry a gay couple, like if a Catholic church doesn't want to marry a gay couple or something like that, what they do is they marry Catholic people that follow Catholic things, and that's not a service that they provide to the general public. It's a service that they provide to the people who follow that faith. And if and I find that different.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to touch that either. I think that.
Yeah, I mean, they don't.
That does need to be kept separate.
Who are not also, yeah, no, it's fair. I mean, they marry people who are part of their parish.
Yeah. So with this particular case, it was a cake baker who didn't even see the cake design and didn't know anything except that the people who wanted to buy the cake were gay, and he said no. And I don't like that.
Yeah.
But we only get to that question if the cake is considered art. But apparently no one wants to talk about that. We're all just going to jump and assume that the cake is art and continue this conversation.
That's actually probably his better argument, but it's not the only one. The religious freedom argument is really the shittier argument of the two.
The cake has to be art.
No, it doesn't.
Hang on a second.
For the first argument that it's artistic expression that is compelled, yes. But for the argument that we're having, it doesn't have to be art.
The holding of Colorado Court of Appeals when this got kicked up the chain, they said that despite the artistic nature, cake making is expected conduct of the business rather than an expression of speech or free exercise of religion. Essentially saying that it's artistic, but it's so.
It's not art.
You're banging out cake, so it's not really art. Yes, it requires some sort of skill and your own, your own touch to it, but it's not really you expressing yourself so much as just any more than like someone who like paints cars, essentially. Like you paint the cars, you go through the process. I'm sorry.
Artistic.
I was gonna say it is culinary art technically. So
yeah, I mean, so I'm on team. This is cake art, but
I'm with you.
But the thing is, so my issue is, and how I think what will happen with the Supreme Court. So for this to be something that says I have a freedom of speech, or I have my First Amendment freedoms at play here, and I want to exercise them by not using my speech for these particular people, that speech first has to be art. And I've seen beautiful cakes. They're totally art. I think cake can be art. In this one particular instance, they didn't they didn't talk about the cake design. They had no plans for what, there was nothing about what the cake would look like. There was no beginnings of art being made. So that's also my issue. That's really my issue. I don't think that this is art here in this one particular circumstance.
It's not even just that it's art, because if it's a piece of art and you refuse to sell it to a gay couple, that's also discrimination. It's the artistic, like if the gay couple commissioned you to design a piece of art for them, and the message was something about something you do not agree with, that's a different story. And that's the artistic expression argument.
Yes.
The artistic expression argument is this wedding cake.
But I don't know what you're missing there, Siobhan. Yeah, if I'm an artist and a gay couple contacts me and says, I want you to paint something mused by these ideas that have this message that come forth, and I don't want my art to express that, I don't have to. But if it's just because they're gay, that's different.
It means you want your art to express that, just not for them, essentially.
Well, I mean,
would that be what you're saying?
No, it's like, if I'm a great painter, I have a friend who's a really great painter. People contact him and say, hey, I would like a piece of artwork. He talks to them, and if they have colors that he doesn't like and an idea that he doesn't like, that's not some kind of art that he wants to make, and he doesn't have to make it. But if the people contacted him, and before even getting into whether or not he would even like making this art, he was like, oh no, you're gay. But he's gay, and that wouldn't happen. But anyway,
well, you never know.
That would be different, but so there's a factual timeline distinction on it. It's, was this, it never even got to the point where this cake baker, who I'm sure is an artist in certain, like baking cakes can definitely be an art, but if you don't like the message that this art, if you don't want to make that art, you have, that's your own prerogative. You have a right to not express art in that way, but it's based off of that expression, not on the customer wanting it. And in here, we have him refusing it, not based off of a cake design. That was never discussed. Nothing about the cake design was discussed. It was just about the people.
So I'm getting this impression you favor the artistic expression argument.
Which is?
What you were just talking about.
I
mean, I was just talking out of my ass, so.
Here.
All right.
Sometimes we do that here. Here's a question. Would you consider all, and not just for Eric, but for anyone, actually really more for Haley than anybody else, that all works of art are free speech?
Yeah.
No.
Sure.
Because I bring it up because the Court of Appeals held it. In this case, it did not.
Well, I mean, I also think that art's subjective, so that's kind of an issue. Like, if I consider it a work of art, yeah, I consider it also free speech.
Anybody, Siobhan?
I mean, I'm with her, so.
Yeah, I guess.
Law, so not really.
I mean,
I guess what, and I don't want to go too far off on a tangent, but like, what do you mean by free speech when you're making a cake? Like, what exactly is your speech? This is a pretty cake, like.
But I mean, I think it also. I think it depends on like.
I think we found something we disagree on. By the way, this is cool.
Oh wow! Yeah, this is the first. I mean, well, I think a lot of this is extremely subjective, and if I'm a shitty cake baker and I bake crappy cakes, I might really like them. I don't know. I might really like him, but maybe other people won't consider it art. So maybe that would be a test of, you know, I've painted some really crappy paintings. I don't know if other people would consider it art. So I think it might have to be like is it something that other people consider art? Is he considered someone who makes art? He can say that he's an artist. We can talk, but you know,
and I don't deny that. I mean, I think a lot of that comes down to, does he think he's doing art at the time in which he's doing it? I think there's.
And I know that I just said like other people would have to consider it art. I do think that matters though in the legal analysis. But
yeah, because the court didn't, you know, or when no, not that it didn't consider it art, considered it art, but didn't consider it free speech.
So the lower court considered it art, and then they did the balance of liberties. They did the balance of the liberty to express yourself versus the balance of the liberty to not be discriminated against.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not even from what I was reading. They weren't talking about the balance of liberties here. They were just talking about that with regards to whether or not this is considered, you know, free speech on his part. The cake making is that this. So
it's focused on whether or not it was art.
Not art, but is this artistic expression a matter of free speech or just the normal conduct of business? Is he this guy banging out cakes? Or is he doing something about like expressing himself?
I think we're talking past each other a little bit.
Maybe, and I'm only going by what I read. So, and obviously I'm not the lawyer
here. And you know, art doesn't like art has many meanings and everything, but it seems as if the lower court was really focused on the issue of whether or not there was art here. And was there discussion of not designing a cake, not knowing anything about, was there any kind of discussion? I haven't read the lower court opinion, so.
Right, but I don't think, they're not denying that art was there. They're denying that art constituted free speech.
Which art?
The cake making.
In general?
That's, as, again, I would have to pull it back up, but what I wrote down, what I was taking from that is despite the artistic nature, cake making is expected conduct of the business rather than an expression of free speech or free exercise of religion.
That's an interesting way to go about it.
I know. That's why I thought it was interesting. That's why I brought it up in the first.
I think that's wrong. I mean, I think it kind of needs to be fact specific. You know, like case specific.
Yeah, and I would have to hear more of the opinion on that.
I mean, I don't think you can categorically say that cake making is an art, because I've seen some pretty some beautiful cakes out there.
They're not saying it's not art. They're saying it's not artistic expression because you're not saying something with the cake. Like if I paint a landscape, I'm not. No,
but they're saying that artistic expression is not free speech.
They're saying artistic expression is not free speech?
In this case, because this guy is in a business of banging out cakes, that's not an expression of free speech on his part. He's just decorating cakes. Yes, it requires artistic ability, but like it's not him expressing something about it. There's not like a message or something. Maybe is what they're saying. That there's not. I know it's weird, right? Maybe
honestly, I feel
it's not weird.
I feel as if they're kind of talking shit about this dude's cake making skills. And
by all accounts, he's a great, cake baker and decorator.
Apparently, he just bangs out cakes and doesn't put any kind of his own artistic spin on it. I mean, you can make boxes for a living, but there are people who, put their self into how they make something. And they make something in a way that they want. Things can be art. You can be a chair maker, but there are different levels of chair makers. Some chairs are amazing.
Yeah, and some are just Spartan little,
sounds like the IKEA of cakes.
Right. Well, I don't think it's so much that. I think it's maybe the question is he really trying to say something with the decoration other than, aren't my cakes, pretty and beautiful? Is he in some way adding his commentary to the event of the wedding by being the one who decorates things. Because I think that's what the problem is, that he doesn't want to do that because he feels that by decorating a cake for a same-sex marriage, that he is in some way endorsing the marriage.
I think that maybe it comes down to, in doing the act of creating a product, is there a level, here's a cake and I design it or whatever, or in each cake or whatever you make, do you get the general idea of what someone wants? And I'm thinking about my friend who's an artist. He gets the general idea of what someone wants and the colors and the colors that they like, and then he expresses himself on the canvas. He'd probably say that shit, but it's him making something, and sure, it's per the specs of the client. It's the color, it's the canvas size, it's the general thing that they want, but then he expresses himself, and he's not necessarily trying to say any one thing in particular. What he's trying to do is express himself in making his art, and that's how a lot of artists are. And so that's why whenever you're saying they appreciate the artistic expression, but this dude's just banging out cakes, makes me think they're kind of talking shit about his cake making skills. And maybe he doesn't actually have, as a cake maker, he doesn't put, his own individual input on making a cake. He just follows the directions and nothing more.
I don't think it's quite that black and white. I'm saying, and this is just me reading into what the verbiage is here, but that they're acknowledging that he is, there's some level of self-expression going on with regards to the art, but it doesn't attain the level of him making some kind of a statement or commentary on what the cake is for, in terms of, again, whether or not he's endorsing. Because if he's trying to make a religious exemption to doing this, that he's participating by making a cake for a same-sex marriage, that he's basically participating in their sin, essentially. I've heard this, that's from Romans 1, I think. But that's his problem with it, that him making this cake for them is his way of that he feels like he's endorsing that because it's his cake and his expression is going to that it amounts to the level of him saying he's endorsing it by letting them have it. And I think the Court of Appeals is saying, well, yeah, you're making an artistic expression, but maybe it doesn't amount to the, and again, I would have to read more. It doesn't amount to you actually endorsing this wedding yourself. You're just making cakes, dude.
It feels as if it's his argument is very focused on the customer still. There was an interview with a cake maker who makes very beautiful cakes, and she talked about a white supremacist who commissioned her to make a cake, and she made it. And that's because she makes artistic cakes. And they asked for a cake that was, a white cake with flowers and everything. And she made it.
Of course it was white.
Zing. I didn't expect that.
Yeah, not at all. Didn't see that coming a million miles away.
It was still, the artistic focus was, I'm expressing my art through a cake, and it's not these white supremacists are asking me to make a cake that looks like a burning cross with a black dude hanging in a tree in the background, because I don't want to express that art. They're asking me to make a beautiful cake, and I'll make a beautiful cake for them. And that's kind of where, I see the distinction, while also noting the moderate shit talking on this dude's cake making skills. But it just seems to me as if if it's just a base cake, you know, what's the deal? But is it art in this particular instance when they didn't even get to that point? It wasn't that the person told them the colors they liked and what generally they kind of wanted the cake to look like. They didn't tell him if he wanted it to be a 3-tiered white cake that had flowers growing up the side, and then you just show me what you can produce with that template, because that's what the white supremacist said.
Yeah.
So it was just, you're gay and I'm not going to make it.
Right. Yeah, I think
also you're gay and I'm not going to make a cake celebrating your marriage, because I feel as if that is me endorsing your marriage by just making a cake.
That seems like, not to be crude, but that seems like his own problem. Like, you know,
right?
Like make an artistic cake. If it's, you know, if you make art, but you don't like the kind of, you know, the muse that they're providing you to commission you to make this art, that's a different story. But your issue is with the people.
Let me ask this to Eric, because he's been quiet for a while. The example that Haley gave of this lady who made a beautiful cake for a white supremacist, do you think her making this cake is tantamount to endorsing white supremacy?
I don't think so.
Okay, so given that logic, essentially, do you see it as different with regards to the gay wedding cake?
Like the dude making the cake, is he endorsing
Phillips,
gay marriage, that type of thing?
Is it Phillips?
No, I don't really see a difference personally.
You don't see a difference? And this is okay. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. I mean, I was gonna say it's a personal issue at that point. I mean, yeah, I personally don't see baking a cake for a gay marriage means you support it. I don't see the connection there, so maybe I'm just different. I don't know.
No, I mean, I agree with you.
I agree with that too.
We have surprising level of consensus here, because like originally when I posted this in the apologetics group about this, and you know, your position was that this is just a straight up violation of this dude's religious freedom, and that, you know, by, you know, saying that he has to do this is basically saying like screw religious freedom in the First Amendment. Is that something that maybe you've evolved from that position, or?
I mean, my position pretty much still stands. The market should deal with that stuff, not the government, for anybody, not just religious people.
Gotcha. But do you still look at it as a religious freedom issue?
I mean, to an extent, yeah.
Okay. I'm not trying to pick on you too much. Can you expound at all, like where you still are with that? Because
well, I mean, like, again, if he doesn't want to, you know, because he feels like he would be supporting, which I don't think he would be, but again, that's kind of his issue. If he feels that way, though, I mean, I feel like that should be respected, and he shouldn't have to make it.
Gotcha. But okay. But I guess that comes down to more your beliefs of a more sort of ideal system of government, and whether or not we should let the free market decide these things versus what the actual laws and the Constitution say.
Well, no,
there's a difference there.
No, well, sorry to jump in, but okay, if he feels that way, that should be his choice. But do you take into account how the other people feel who've been refused service because they're gay?
Well, I mean, yeah, of course, they obviously feel discriminated against, but I mean, it's happened to me and other people that I know, and I mean,
does that make it okay?
Like, well, it doesn't make it okay, but I mean, I don't think you should, again, get government involved and shut this dude's shop down just because, you know, you got your feelings hurt.
Well, I mean, that's not happening for one, but we're talking about, you know, liberties, which is, I think, something that's quintessential to being American. And, you know, it should be his choice to discriminate against someone for his own personal feelings, but you also recognize that gay people shouldn't have to deal with that, right?
I don't think anybody should have to deal with that, but I mean, it's just, that's not the world we live in, so I'm kind of a realist about it.
Well, of course it's not the world that we live in, but, you know, we're trying to make it the world we live in. That's the point.
That's cool. I'm totally okay with that. I support that fully. I just don't think government should do that for us.
But no one else will, is the problem.
I don't agree with that.
I'm sorry, you do or do not agree with that?
I think we're kind of selling humanity short.
Well, but how does it get remedied?
Well, I mean, that's an issue of the heart. So, I mean, that's like a deep kind of philosophical issue there.
But history tells us that that does not play out in favor of equality. I mean, we have anti-discrimination laws because it was a very tangible and is still a very tangible issue that was not being corrected by the fact that we recognize that equality was something we should strive towards.
Well, I mean, my views are pretty much, I mean, if people want to be white supremacists or whatever, I feel like they should be allowed their own little camp or community or whatever, and they can all kind of convene there and do their own thing, whereas other people shouldn't be free to do that same thing depending on their views and whatnot. So that's kind of where I stand on that. Maybe it's a little idealistic, but
I mean, this cake baker wasn't, a white supremacist living in a white community. He was a dude providing services to everyone in the public. And then, he called out this gay couple. And I mean, I find it interesting, your anarchist views and everything, and, the market will correct itself and everything. But I'm curious if you recognize that there's the potential for a lot of flaws in that. Thinking back to the bad horticulturalist who doesn't tend to his trees well.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of, the nature of the beast. There's always going to be potential problems. But 1 second, guys.
Yeah, I guess while he's away, I think the argument he's making, and not to speak for him too much, is that he's not interacting with the laws as they are. He's talking about the laws or society as he thinks it should be. That's fine. Eric, what I was saying is it sounds again more like you're not really commenting so much on what should happen per the laws as they are on the books versus what you would rather see us do as society. Is that at all accurate?
I mean, yeah, that's fair to say.
Gotcha.
Well, all right. You go.
Yeah. And I guess, and that's the thing is like we can have that sort of hypothetical discussions, but in the meantime, we still have the laws that we have, and this is sort of about interpreting the law, whether or not Phillips' rights were or are being violated versus whether or not this couple's rights were violated, and what is the appropriate decision for the Supreme Court given the laws of the land as they are. To put a bow on this a little bit, how do you think this thing should be ruled based on the laws, not necessarily what you would prefer the laws to be, but based on what the laws actually say?
Yeah, real quick, I think before I cut out, Haley asked me a question. I didn't want to.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Disrespectful. No, I didn't know if you wanted to continue on our little tangent there or not, Haley.
Just you say whatever you want to say.
It's cool, man. Like we're pretty casual here.
What was your question again?
I don't even remember.
Haley. I think it was something about advocating for being like problematic. If I seen that or not.
I'm sorry. What?
Potentially problematic. I think you were saying something about the free market model that I was kind of advocating there, being potentially problematic.
Do you recognize that
I maybe answer David's question first, and then we can go backtrack and try and figure out what we were talking about before the break? I think that probably makes more sense.
Yeah, could we?
Yeah, sure.
Again, to rehash, based on not necessarily what you would prefer to see the laws look like in terms of what you feel is a more ideal model, but like based on the actual laws, how do you think the Supreme Court should go on this one?
I mean, they should just let them bake cakes for who he wants to bake cakes for.
Based on the law, or based on how you think the law should be?
Well, let's warm him up, because I think he might have been interested in my question.
Okay.
So, do you recognize that even based on your ideal situation of the free market society governing, that it is subject to having flaws and abuse?
Sure, everything does.
So, and I understand that you're an anarchist, but do you also see a value in having laws in place that sort of keep in check your growing garden, your growing forest, how people treat one another, to make sure that they all treat them like people?
I mean, I'm more like about rules instead of laws. I don't see an issue there. I just
So, and in thinking about this, like, are you against a rule saying that businesses can't discriminate against a person based off of their sexual orientation?
Am I against a rule like that, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, I mean, it's their business, so they should be able to conduct it the way they want to. And I mean, I feel like people don't have a right to. I don't think that's a right. I think that's a privilege. That's a luxury.
Okay, so under your analysis, if a restaurant wants to discriminate against Black people or women or people who are gay, they have the right to do that.
Or should have the right to do that, is what you're saying.
Should have the right to do that.
Absolutely.
And dead air. It's like I don't really know where to go with that. Like it's it comes back to, I think a point I made much earlier is like I don't really want to live in that kind of society where like it's only okay for me to be certain places based on again non fungible characteristics about myself. I don't want to have to not shop at a certain store or not be able to get a hotel room in a place because I'm white or because I'm an atheist or.
Well, I think you're thinking about it the wrong way. I mean, you're pretty much saying if that was the case, you wouldn't be able to find that would serve you. It would just. I mean, I don't think that's realistic. I think you would have a plethora of other options to choose from in a free market.
History says that you're wrong, actually, because the reason why we have anti-discrimination laws is because it was such a prevalent issue that people were not getting service or hotels or restaurants or doctors or whatever.
I mean let's go back even further.
Like this law wasn't exactly born out of like bunny rabbits and unicorns. It was born out of necessity. So to say that we're being unrealistic about it is to mean that you haven't actually read any kind of historical precedent in the last 100 years.
I think it goes more simplistically than that. You like choices. Everyone should have choices. Free market should be dictated by choices. Businesses should be able to make choices however they see fit. But as we've learned, that gave rise to all of the monopolies at the turn of the 20th century. And shouldn't other people have choices? Like not just the business owner, but shouldn't the customers have a choice that they should be able to buy a cake from this great cake maker because he makes great cakes? Shouldn't they also have that choice? Or should they have to settle for maybe someone who's of lesser value because the business person made the choice that they don't serve women, they don't serve white people, they don't serve black people, whatever. You know, if it's really about choices, then we have to actually, you know, for something to start functioning, there has to be a balance to the choices. You have to weigh the choices, you know, with everyone that's involved in the society. And sure, it might work on a small society living on a hill, but whenever we're talking big, you know, a big country, uh, there is a balance of liberties that needs to come into play.
Well, that's sort of more my stance, by the way, what you just said. I'm not really advocating that model to be a countrywide type of thing. I mean, like I said, I support like people breaking off in their own little communities and doing their own thing. So,
I mean, I guess another way to sort of ask, I guess what we're all getting at is, I mean, do you think that like the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that wasn't created to address a societal ill? I mean,
well, I mean, laws. I don't know, because I mean, laws don't really change people genuinely. All they really do is just force them to want to. I don't think that's a. I don't think that's attacking the heart of the problem. I mean,
So
well,
you
I mean,
don't think, okay, so let's
Wait,
break
but what
this
is the
down
heart of the
real
problem?
quick. No, I think we should unpack this a little bit. So like forcing, you know, for instance, desegregation of schools, like maybe it didn't change that generation's feelings about race relations, but for the rest of us who grew up in a situation where there was desegregation and we didn't have white schools and black schools and stuff like that, do you really not believe that it changed the opinions or, you know, world outlook of the kids who grew up in that next generation without those dividing lines?
I mean, the human nature kind of says otherwise. I mean, there's still a bunch of racist people, young and old.
So what
So
is
I
the heart
mean,
of the problem?
like I said, that's kind of an issue with the human heart, if you will. So I mean, we'd have to go philosophical with that one.
So in
Go for it.
so in your opinion, people who have gotten
But
to know
like,
people
Siobhan,
who are
let
different
him
from them,
pontificate for a little bit. Let him like, what's the heart of the problem?
I mean, unjustified hatred and fear of people who are different than you are.
So what's wrong with laws that, you know, tell people stop your unjustified hatred or fear of people?
Because it doesn't actually stop it.
Well, but it curtails it.
Yeah, but like I said, I want to see it addressed in a more organic fashion, rather than
How?
just saying, "Hey, stop doing that because there's a law that says you can't do it." I want you to stop doing that because you recognize the of what you're doing, and you want.
So the heart of the problem is everyone's going to have their own specific prejudices against certain groups of people, but you don't think that laws that are put into place, you know, to curtail that, which we have to admit have had an effect. There is less discrimination going on in this country. Sure, it still exists. We can't, you know,
It's not as
expect for,
overt.
huh?
I wouldn't. I would say it's not as overt, but it still exists. I'd say even more so these days.
I mean, we don't have lynchings and white dudes who admitted to killing, you know, a black guy in Mississippi and then drowning his body. That's not going on anymore.
You sure about
So,
that?
I
You don't think
mean,
so? You don't
yeah.
think white supremacy isn't a thing anymore? You don't think people
No,
aren't
I mean, I
killing
do
out
think
of
white supremacy
racial?
is a thing. I don't think that white supremacists are able to get away with admitted murder of black people anymore, though. They
I
were
don't
in the
know.
1950s.
I don't know. Like I said, I don't think it's as overt, sure, but I think it still happens. I
I
mean,
mean,
I
I think that racism still exists. Don't get me twisted. But what if you're saying that that laws that help people to stop discriminating aren't doing anything to resolve the problem, and per your own words, need to have some kind of organic solution, but you're also an anarchist. I feel as if you're saying we're in a shit pot. Why don't we all just break off into our own communities and we'll be good, because these small communities can govern things the way that they want to.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that still be a system of government, though?
Yeah, but it'd
Like,
be justified. It'd be justified. It'd be a justified version of government, which I think is fine.
So I think you're basically just against federalization, like
Well, I mean,
like
I
this
think it's even
top-down
more
kind
than
of
that.
thing.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I'm saying that it's more an opposition, not necessarily to government, because I mean that's my understanding of anarchy is that there's no government, but that you're talking about extremely small localized government versus like a federalized government, which is what we have.
Based thing, yeah. I mean, to specify, I can't speak for all anarchists because there are multiple branches. But for me, it's
all
more.
to unpack. I mean, that's just I have a sort of a basic understanding of it.
But I mean, it's also like it goes against ideas of globalism and right? Are you agreeing with me?
You said you're for or against globalism?
No. You are against globalism, correct?
Yes.
And you're against just kind of the widespread of some kind of set of rules that govern how you think individually, correct?
Widespread meaning like they should apply to everybody in the country.
Well, you're talking that you want very small communities to just kind of run on their own and do their own thing, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
And so you would be against some kind of global sort of set of rules that define how people should interact with one another.
Mm-hmm.
Well, isn't Christianity that?
Well, no, because
there you go.
I knew that was going to come up. So
we could do probably years on that, but yeah, let's not go too deep in there. But go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say you might want to push this back like 4 hours.
Yeah, right.
What were you defining Christianity as?
I mean, you are for individual small-based societies running things the way that they see it, right? Yes?
Correct.
And you don't think that there should be any kind of global rules in place that define and instruct how individuals should act with one another, especially if they're from different little small societies, right?
Right.
Christianity is a global religion that defines how individuals should interact with one another. Right?
Are people forced to become a Christian?
Well, you're getting it. I mean, you're avoiding the question.
No, I mean, because you're kind of making it out to be Christianity is this thing that forces people to believe, like they have the government come in and force people, you need to believe in Jesus or
Are you now saying that Christianity isn't rules, it's more like guidelines?
I mean, it's pretty much.
If I can help Eric out just slightly, maybe is it more the idea that if in an ideal society that you envision, that if people are accepting Christianity, then they don't really have that much of a need of secular government? Is that sort of where you're going with it?
If that's what they want to do, sure.
I mean, eventually, you know, because you're talking about like, oh, well, maybe people, they just want to go off and live in their own little, well, you know, we run into problems because like, well, maybe there's people already living there. Look at Palestine, you know, you know, if we essentially, if we don't have, if we, yeah, and it's not working out very well over there. If we just want to, you know, if we don't enforce rules, then people will take it upon themselves to stand up for either what their wants are or what they believe their rights are. Right? That if there's no enforcement of anything from, you know, government authority, essentially, which is ultimately backed up by force, then people will act in force on their own. I mean, that's to me is the problem with anarchy, is that if there's no rules, there's nothing to stop me from, you know.
Well, there would be rules.
Well, but I also think that part and parcel with having a true anarchist position is to also have an absence of Judeo-Christian religion, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but have you heard the news? And every person who's Christian said, yes, I've heard the news. The news is to spread good news. You want to spread the good news of the Lord. That is a fundamental tenet of Christianity. The 10 Commandments, those 10 rules. You want to spread, as a Christian, not you specifically, you in general, as a Christian, want to spread the message of the Bible and have people follow the 10 Commandments, because thou shalt not kill, honor thy mother and father, don't covet thy neighbor. Those are rules that you want people to follow. And if you are an anarchist who wants things to be defined down to individual societies running on their own, I don't see how that can be in any way connected to also being a Christian person who is following the tenets and spreading the good news.
I guess I don't see why not.
Because you're asking other people from other little anarchist communities to follow rules.
Well, right, asking, not forcing them to.
So I guess the question is, so what happens if they don't? And what happens if not only do they not want to follow your rules, that they think, you know, for example, that you know, what's to stop them from just taking you out because they disagree with you? If there's
each community would have a right to. If each community would have the right to defend themselves.
Well, right and ability are not necessarily the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, right, but I mean, you're like, what's the issue exactly? You're saying Christianity isn't compatible with anarchy, or is that?
Yeah,
I think it's more I just don't see how the anarchy in general would work, because of people's ideological differences, people's, you know, selfish actions, what have you. Like, somebody will maintain it, because even in your version of anarchy, there's still some kind of rule following, you know, and there has to be some kind of enforcement. The rubber hits the road at some point, because just doing whatever you want, you're going to affect other people, right?
I mean, there would be enforcement to an extent. I mean, if you didn't want to adhere to a particular rule, you're free to disassociate with that community and go somewhere else where, you know, it would be a more ideal community for somebody like yourself. You could do that.
I guess. So, like, I feel like we've gotten pretty far afield here, though, from the Supreme Court case.
I don't know.
It's fine. No, that's fine.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out how. I don't know if that was a claim or not, but like Christianity being incompatible with anarchy, I guess I just don't see that. I think Haley said that, so I kind of wanted her to elaborate a little bit more, because
I mean, just a fundamental tenet of Christianity is to spread the good news. Part of Christianity is to follow the 10 Commandments. And, you know, if you're saying if someone doesn't follow the rules, they can leave the community. Well, what if someone kills your wife? They didn't follow the rule, totally broke a commandment. And you know what? They leave the community. And then what if another community is totally for taking you over and you have to defend yourself? You know, I mean, it's
well, we're not exactly advocating for a utopia. I mean, you're gonna run
Well, I
into
mean,
your fair share of
but the
problems
thing
either
is,
way.
anytime a question has been pressed to you, you've fallen back on this anarchy position and this choice position. And if you say that you're not actually advocating for a utopia, I've asked you questions of how things would get resolved, and I feel as if I haven't gotten answers. So, you know, I mean, if you're not arguing
What
for a
question?
utopia, you prevent people from not treating other people just like people, without rules. If you're a Christian, you have rules.
Can't do that.
And I feel as if you're an anarchist, you can't be a Christian, you can't follow Christianity in the sense of there are rules. And what's the difference between a law, saying treat everyone the same versus a tenet of Christianity saying treat everyone the same? It seems like the same kind of thing. And with anarchy, that is different from those kinds of practices in governing a society and making a society grow.
So I don't know. I guess I'm still not seeing the issue.
That's fine.
I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know, because I don't see the issue though. Because what are you arguing that? Like again, as Christian, are you saying Christianity isn't compatible with anarchy because it has its own rules laid down, and that might conflict with other
But
people's
I mean,
rules?
I thought that the Ten Commandments were basically Christian laws.
Well, I mean, everybody follows those for the most part anyway, whether they're a Christian or not. So,
Well,
I mean, you're not murdering people. You're not stealing anyone's stuff right now. You're not coveting anyone's wife. So, I mean,
anarchy is a lack of laws.
well, it's a lack of unjustified governance.
yeah, and that's why I think we're getting a little weird on the definitions here, because I think we're operating off of one understanding of what, and I brought this up earlier. One understanding of what anarchy means is, basically no government and people, just kind of do what they want. But then you're saying, well, no, they kind of don't just do what they want, but only to an extent, and only when it's justified. But how do you decide what's justified? If nobody has to agree with you, I think is what the real problem is.
And also, like, what's the difference between the government and religious institutions? They both promulgate this, things that should govern how we as people interact with one another. And so, what is the difference? So, and that's where I find the incompatibility. If you're an anarchist, I think that you would be against some kind of overruling institution that is promulgating rules that define how you interact in society and life with other people, however big or small. And it seems inconsistent. If you're a Christian, you're a part of the Christian institution. And I don't see how that marries with being an anarchist.
And I'm not a Christian. That's part of, I don't know what you said, an institution. I don't really subscribe to the church flow, if you will. And
I mean, you have your pictures of a cross, man.
Right. I mean, right. I'm a Christian, but that doesn't mean I attend church, or I think, for example, the Catholic Church should hold as much political power as it does.
But Christian tenets govern how you interact with people?
If you willingly submit to them, yes, but it's about choice, so you're not being forced to. I mean, that's why you'll hear most Christians, when they're giving like their testimony or something, say that I accepted Jesus, meaning they submitted to him out of their own free will. Not that somebody forced them to do it.
Except for Calvinists, but yeah.
Well, I mean, shots fired.
Yeah, right. I mean, when they talk about, the tulip, the irresistible grace, that like you're drawn by the Spirit, and you don't really even have to say that. So. Yeah. I get fine. Yeah, I don't want to argue Calvinism against him, because it's like, arguing over the Easter Bunny's middle name. Like I'm not going there, because I don't see the need to take it that far. At least because there's no one defending that position anyway. But like, I don't know. I guess what you're saying is like, yes, it can be compatible because you only listen and adhere to that if you choose to do so. And you can choose to accept these sets of laws, which kind of contradict sort of I guess our common understanding of what anarchy is when you don't have to accept any laws, or that you don't accept any laws and you just do what you want.
That's more of a,
sorry, go on.
So by anarchy, you mean a different kind of anarchy than what we think of as anarchy.
So how is this different
hold on.
to live in a democratic society and abide by these laws that represent what we as a society believe to be right from wrong?
Well, I mean, I don't subscribe to democracy. I feel like it's just mob rule at the end of the day.
So then how do religious tenets come into existence?
I'm sorry, you guys are talking at the same time.
How do religious tenets come into existence then?
How do religious tenets come into existence, you said?
Yes. How do Christian values, Christian virtues, how do they come into existence?
Well, as a Christian, we would say they were dictated to us by God.
And people talk about it, and then there it is.
What do you mean?
I mean, I can't think of a good example because I haven't been to church in a long time, but there are Christian morals that exist that are, based in Christianity, right?
Sure.
And it's all based on the Bible, right?
Sure.
Which we all believe was written through people listening to the words of God, right?
Those inspired by his spirit, yes.
And those rules are then things that we have discussed and analyzed, and different sects of Christianity have formed since then, right?
Yep.
And you don't have to be a pure Catholic, but there are people who have read the words of the Bible. They've all discussed things, come to a consensus, and defined what they think what it means to be Christian, right?
Sure.
And we follow that.
I mean, basically, the sects that you're talking about, they do break off, and they do their own little thing. They run with their own little interpretation of certain scriptures. But I mean, for the most part, we're all pretty unified in the basic tenets.
Well, what kind of Christian are you?
Non-denominational.
You still follow, but you realize, I'm not going to get into Bible crap. You realize it was written by people who voted on how things were going to be written down, right?
Are you talking about the Council of Nicaea and stuff like that?
Mm-hmm. Among other things.
Yeah, one of the many. I mean, Revelations according to John, that was written by numerous people who were.
Are you saying the Bible was written by the Council of Nicaea?
No, of course not.
What are you saying?
The Bible is New Testament or Old Testament. It was written by a series of peoples, and for us to read it in English, it had to be translated by groups of people who then voted on what was the best translation of certain things. And we now follow those tenets if we are Christian. What?
I mean, regarding the translations into English, I mean, there's a lot of scholarship that goes into that. It's a very serious field.
Yes, I majored in ancient Greek translations. I'm well aware. I actually translated a very large portion of the Bible.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
It's actually not Revelations. It's the Apocalypse, according to John. But anyway, King James Bible, things like that. It was a discussion among scholars based on translation who then voted together to determine how the Bible was going to read in this language. Are you fluent in ancient Greek or Attic Greek, what the Bible's written in?
Only to a certain extent.
And what's the certain extent?
Anything beyond the basics, I would still have to study. And I'm currently doing that, so I wouldn't want to speak on that just yet.
You have to recognize that the general message of Christianity Christianity has been defined over a long amount of time and a series of groups of people defining out what the message is.
Are you saying things have changed since then?
No. I mean, that's the whole point. It's organic. I'm saying that the tenets of Christianity, as defined by the Bible, have been promulgated by groups of people over approximately 2,000 years who have all voted on how to translate it from Greek to Latin to German to English to whatever. And our current Bible is written in modern English. Things have been changing, but it's voted on. And they provide the rules that we're following that govern how Christians interact with one another.
I mean, you could always just go back to the original languages.
Of course you can.
So, you know, I mean.
But does it mean that you don't follow, that you don't listen and don't follow what's being talked about now?
Well, I'm confused.
Does it mean you ignore it?
What's the question? I'm confused.
I mean, so if you've avoided my question, let's just note that.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out.
Can we at least agree that the modern English Bible is based off of 2,000 years of dudes talking and voting on what the Bible's going to say, based off of a Greek translation?
They're translating it in various ways. I mean, they want to get it down to.
Guys, I think we are like way off into the weeds here on this one. It is getting late, and I don't. Eric, I'm really glad you came out. I'm not trying to browbeat you, or have this, be that kind of a conversation, because we came to talk about this one case, and we got into all kinds, and we have a tendency to go off on little things, but I think it's as far as I want this to go. So I'm going to put a pin in it for now. Happy to revisit any of this. If you've got friends that disagree with us, that think that we're completely off base, if you want to talk more about anarchy or whatever in a future hangout, if you want to participate in other conversations not related to any of this, that's fine too. It was cool talking to you. It was cool meeting you. And I hope we can do this again.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you much. Haley, Siobhan, thank you for coming out as always. Anybody watching, especially anybody in the Apologetics Academy group who's watched any of this and is losing their mind at this conversation, please feel free to challenge me or anybody else. And check out our YouTube page. Check out we're on iTunes and Beyond Pod as Fermenting Opinions. And again, I'm David Poseidon, and thank you all for being here. Peace.